Just take a couple deep breaths. Any of you who ever have a reading with me, that's the prayer I've said before we talk. So having said it, I created it, and having said it for 20-some years, now I just go. Good morning. No, thank you. All right, so I think I got about 90 minutes here, so I can do these 3 archetypes today through the next 90 minutes. And so, first of all, we're going to work with this archetype of Libra, and I'm just amazed at my voice. Am I picking up okay on the tape?
No worries there.
All right, can you hear me okay? I'm coming through this. I don't hear myself coming through the sound system. So in working with this archetype of Libra, it initiates the second half of the zodiac. And it, of course, is active cardinal air. And so maybe I'll do that too. It's the archetype, because I don't have any chart examples, and because Patricia and Mark are so good at that, and I have so much information in my head to get out, I thank you all for allowing me to be that way. This archetype of Libra is where we initiate the other. The first half of the zodiac is ourself. The second half of the zodiac is the other. And the other starts with Libra, where it is that other person, one-on-one, all the way to Pisces, where it's everybody. So as we go through this second half of the zodiac, the other increasingly expands in who it includes. And so in some of your traditional astrology, Libra was always that intimate partner that we would know as the spouse or the lover. And in evolutionary astrology, that falls into Scorpio when you make that deep emotional commitment. Libra is more the dating scene. Libra is where you have the contrast of the other in the variety of ways. And by checking out this person, that person, and having all that feedback through all that contrast and difference, Libra, then you figure out who you are, Aries polarity, versus all them Libran others. And so Libra is more like where, again, you are checking out other people in a variety of ways. Now, I like to say sometimes that Libra is everybody that you run into beyond an acquaintance level. So that 7th house cusp, yes, it will signify a partner, especially when we do our essential needs formula in segment 1 where we figure out what type of partner we need. That 7th house cusp does come into play. Yet this Libra energy, again, is all these different people that come into our life that give us feedback about ourselves. So it can be the lover, but it can also be the friend. It can also be the co-worker. It can be all these people that we run into. Because Libra is where we have to look outside of ourselves at the rest of the world. So can you start to see with Libra being an air sign how all the communications come in? And one of the things that we also have a tendency to think about with the sign of Libra is that it represents balance. It does not. Libra can represent the extremes of unbalance that we are learning how to balance. If you look in history, when many of your planets transit through Libra, it can be just as important as initiating war as planets in Aries. Because we have these two forces in Libra, all the air signs are duality, okay? And we can have these two forces, and these two forces don't agree. And if tensions escalate, we get a divorce. If tensions escalate, countries start war. So this is the energy of Libra. So Libra contains a lot of archetype within it when we start to get outside of self and look at others. And so we can have these situations where, the other thing about Libra, and this is Venus in the 7th house as well, and Libra is kind of like the outer side of Venus. Okay, Taurus is the inner side of Venus, Libra is the outer side of Venus. And so when we start looking at that, and I'm even fracturing, geez, Neptune in, or Uranus in Pisces. But I'm tracking, I'm bringing it, I'll bring it back around. When we are looking at this archetype of relationships with Libra, one of the things that we can run into, and this is due to a lot of patriarchal conditioning upon the planet, we live in a society that glorifies victimization. We live in a society that promotes and conditions codependency. And so Libra has become very codependent. And so Libra can get into that need to be needed. If you have a lot of the Libra 7th house Venus archetype in your chart, you don't want to be alone. You'll be with anybody rather than being with yourself. And that Aries polarity is that you have to be with yourself. You have to know who you are in the midst of all these other people. So if you watch this Pluto in Libra generation, or somebody who has 5 planets in the 7th house, do you notice how sometimes they just keep talking and talking and talking, and you've got to move on, and you've got to catch the bus, and you've got to go do this, and they just keep talking and talking and talking. And my little old Mars in Libra, you know, I finally realized I just got to do the Aries thing and cut them off. They don't even notice. I feel bad cutting them off, Pluto Virgo. They don't even notice I've cut them off, because that's how that Libra energy operates. And so if you notice people with a lot of Libra energy in their charts, when they're working their way through relationships, I have deep Scorpio energy. And when I have a relationship end, I got to crawl in my cave. And I don't want to jump back in for a while. Whereas Libra, oh yeah, we related for 3 years and we broke up 2 weeks ago, and now I have the love of my life who's just come in. They're like change relationships like we change underwear. And so that's that Libra, that's that air energy that's always got to be relating. That's always got to be checking out somebody else. They only know themselves through somebody else. You know, and so that bouncing back and forth off of somebody else is how that Libra energy has a tendency to operate all the time. And so again, a lot of Libra energy really has to learn how to go to that Aries polarity and learn how to be alone. And I have a very close friend of mine, one of my first astrological friends, you know, back home, and she's got a lot of Libra energy, and it took me a while to understand that she could end a relationship and start another one up the next day and just go on, you know. And so through that shifting back and forth with all of that relating, that's how Libra evolves. And that's how Libra learns to find its homeostasis and its balance. So, Pluto in Libra generation, and there's lots more I could say. I could talk for 3 days on Libra, okay? I could talk for 3 days on any archetype. I just got to kind of cut in and hone in onto what I can find as these archetypal essences for you. Leave Patricia and Mark to pick up a few pieces, and hopefully we're all giving you everything between the 3 of us. So, this Pluto in Libra generation, these are souls who have come in with a lot of relationship history. Many times there's a lot of relationship woundedness within them. There's also a lot of relationship codependencies. And so, you know, these are some young souls on the planet, and yet I've had a tendency to tell these Pluto and Libras, if they would come to me when they were young enough, please, as best as you can, don't have kids until your Saturn return. It's easier. But that doesn't go that way. Because, you know, they've got the part of that relationship karma for them is the kids and the marriages and the divorce and going through these multiple relationships and figuring this stuff out. That's just, we've got to be careful not to judge that. Terry.
I'm reminded of something you said about...
Hold on, let Michelle wake up.
Sorry. I'm reminded of something I've heard you talk about with these Libra and Pluto and Libras that go from one relationship to another, and it was really cute. It was about how does he smell, how does she smell,
Oh, yes, 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 that one. Thank you for reminding me of that one. That actually belongs in the Taurus archetype of Venus. We usually speak about that in Sagittarius with natural law, but let's just touch it right now. She says, tell them how these Pluto and Libras can get past this confusion of all these relationships, you know. First of all, I have a tendency to say if there's love at first sight or instant attraction, it's a red flag. Because you get past the honeymoon and you're right back to those problems and that karma that you couldn't get past the last time around. So when we used to live in more natural law, the way we picked our partners was through the sense of smell, the pheromones. And that's related to Taurus and Libra, Taurus and the Venus side of Taurus in the second house, because that was our survival. You notice the animals, they've not lost that keen sense of smell. I have a south node in Taurus. I have a lot of Scorpio in my chart, and I have an extremely sensitive nose. My nose is like the canary in the environment, because I can smell things that, you know, other people can't smell. That's when you know you have a lot of Taurus in your chart. Or Scorpio, sometimes it's that polarity point. But what happened in natural law is we used our nose to pick out our partners. And so what I tell these Pluto and Libras is that if you're in that dating scene, go for a nice sweaty hike, you know, because you want to get past the perfumes and the colognes. And if you really can catch a whiff of somebody's natural scent, you want the natural scent, you want the BO. I know this sounds gross, but it works. I've tried it. I've tested it. It's just their natural scent, because we all have it. We still have it. We haven't lost our pheromones. We've just covered them up. So when you have that, then what you can do is when you are, and this works for all of us, not just the Pluto and Libras. This would be good for us going through this day's archetypes. If that scent smells inviting, go forward. If that scent repels you, clean up the karma, walk away. And if that scent is neutral, you have free choice. Oh man, does it make relationships easier? I give myself goosebumps. It does. It really works. It saved me a lot of time with karma mates. And an 8th house Pluto is bringing through the karma clearings. Okay? So good point. Thanks, Terry. You're going to be working. She's going to be one of those who's going to be helping out. You're ready. And so these Pluto and Libras, this is a natural way, especially for them, because they get into that airhead stuff, and they get very confused in really trying to figure out, you know, but I thought this was a nice person, and I really like this person, and we really got along. That pheromone stuff just cuts through the bullshit, okay? And so these Pluto and Libras, they have to learn that Aries polarity lesson to really, and another thing that I tell the Pluto and Libra generation is that when you're facing a dilemma in your life, I want you to go be by yourself, Aries, and I want you to meditate on what you would do if you were all alone. And whatever that decision would be, if you were all alone, you must make that same action in your relationships. And that's how you know that you're moving in healthy directions. Because Libra is, you know, so that air sign can just, you know, you take in this a person's opinion and that person's opinion. We all know we've all got Libra in 7th house in our charts. We all have a Venus. And so we all notice how we'll shift, and I'm really good at this. This is why I can organize these things, because I can shift so well with everybody. But we have to then learn to be able to, especially in intimate relationships or close friendships, you have to go in that direction you would go if you were all alone. And you have to be able to do that within those relationships. That's when you're moving in healthy directions for Libra, and especially for the Pluto and Libra generation. Now, the other thing that we have going on with these Pluto and Libras and the transit of Pluto and Capricorn is we have the they're going in their first Pluto squares, crises and actions, when they're working with that kind of stuff. So I'll move into that, but first of all, a question, Laura?
So as a Pluto Libra generation with Sun in the 7th,
Pluto, Libra, Sun in the 7th.
and they're squared.
Squared.
So my experience as that has been the exact opposite. I put up walls, do not let people in, to
Good point.
trust people to have that balance.
Yes.
I'm fiercely independent.
Yes.
And so I think part of that's the square for sure, but I think that's the flip side of Libra.
Yes, that's also your soul's evolutionary expansion of consciousness because, and I'll address that.
The thing about
Go ahead.
the thing about the polarity point for Libra, Aries, the archetype of Aries is self-actualization, to be true to yourself. And so the thing about going to Aries is finding your own truth, and in relationship being in your own truth. So it's not just being alone, but just actualizing who you really are in this relationship and being true to yourself and going back to the relationship in that place of truth.
Yes, yes. This little Pluto in Libra's done the opposite. Instead of being on the needy side of the equation, she's been on the Aries side of the equation and held up the walls. That is the other thing that you will see with a lot of Libra energy. They get so overwhelmed, or there's so much relationship karma that's built up that they go through this phase of really going over to that Aries polarity or putting up the walls and not letting anybody in because they realize they've got to go over to that Aries side and really find their own space and their own self before they can go back in and merge. Okay? That's also something that will naturally come as that expansion of consciousness happens and you going through those various individuated states. That's going to be a natural. If you have a Pluto in Libra, and I'm not saying that's where you're at, I don't think you are, but let me use this as an example. If you have a Pluto in Libra in second stage individuated, which is the rebellion of consensus, and it's in second stage individuated is rebelling against anything and everything. Pluto in Libra, second stage individuated, they will do that. They will just push people away because they recognize they've got to go to that Aries polarity and find themselves. They finally recognize that society can't pull them backward, or you can't, you've gotten this far in expanding your consciousness. You're not going to be pulled back in. So they get to third stage individuated, and they recognize who they are versus someone else. So that Pluto in Libra third stage individuated can go back in and start going through all that relationship stuff and figuring it out again. The same thing will be true for the opposite. You have Pluto in the first house. Those are the Aries. By the way, I have not said this yet. This is something that I've coined up to make it easier for students. When you have Pluto in the first house, Aries soul. Pluto in the second, Taurus soul. Pluto in the third, Gemini soul. Makes it very easy for understanding the depth of the soul when you can relate it that way. You have Pluto in the first house and an Aries soul. They're so orientated into being by themselves and connecting into themselves, but they got all them seventh house polarity point lessons. Pluto first house has a lot of relationship karma built up as well. They just decided to crawl in the cave, get defensive, don't want to go in that relationship direction. I am first, thank you very much. Whereas the seventh house Plutos, or the Plutos in Libras, they're so sensitive to everybody else that it's who am I and who are they. I don't know who I am compared to them. So there's this back and forthness that will happen all the time. All right, this is making sense. So these Pluto in Libras are facing their first quarter squares from transiting Pluto in Capricorn. And as we have this elliptical orbit of Pluto, where it will only spend 10 years in Scorpio, but it'll spend over 30 years in Taurus, as we go through the Pluto in Leo and Pluto in Virgo and Pluto in Libra generations, their first quarter Pluto square comes younger. It will go down into the late 30s. It's now working its way back up to where that Pluto square is happening in the early 40s. You get on the other side of that equation and you have these Pluto in Aquarius, Pluto in Capricorns. They're going to have their first Pluto squares in their 50s, and it goes up to the early 60s. So that first Pluto square that will sometimes be called that midlife crises, it's really the Uranus opposition. But when that Pluto square, first quarter square, is evolving and it moves through that 40s, it will match up or come close to that Uranus opposition, and it does become like it feels one big midlife crises. Maureen?
So, if I'm understanding you correctly, Pluto represents the soul by house, not by sign.
Both. Pluto by
Which-
sign is generational. Pluto by house is the individual soul.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And then, of course, the polarity point by sign, generational lessons. Polarity point by natal house, individual soul lessons. And it's what Patricia's always saying when she refers to the karmic axis. We add on the nodes of the moon, too, for the ego. Okay? And so it's Pluto and the nodes of the moon, Pluto and the nodes. And if you look at your handouts, I gave you a sample chart, a list of how we will go through a chart interpretation using what I call this Pluto formula. It is in your handout. The karmic dynamic is the past, the evolutionary intent is the future, trinity of the past, Pluto, south node ruler, trinity of the future, polarity point of Pluto, north node, planetary ruler of the north node. That's in your handouts. So this first quarter Pluto square, the crises in action is what's happening to this Pluto in Libra generation. And so here these guys are, and I'm just going to loosely say 30s and 40s. And they're married, they got a kid, and Pluto in Capricorn is hitting them. And you can find that this Pluto in Libra generation might be facing a fair amount of depression because their reality, Capricorn, is not what they thought it would be at this point in their life. And with this history of relationship karma that they have, they could find themselves in a relationship that they no longer want to be in or that they're disillusioned about. They could also find themselves all alone. I thought I would be married and have kids by now. What am I doing all alone? If Pluto in Libra is too codependent, the evolutionary intent, Aries, or first house for Pluto in the 7th, is going to force them to be alone in order to get their evolutionary soul lessons. Linda, did you have a question? Yeah. Let her come with the thing. Thank you, honey.
When would the Pluto in Libra have started? I mean, what years?
Pluto in Libra was 1971, 72 through 1983, 84. Pluto in Scorpio, 83, 84 to 1995. Pluto in Sag, 1995 to 2008. I don't think I put that information in the handout. I didn't put that detail in the handout. Yes?
That would maybe have late degrees, Pluto in Libra going into Pluto's in Scorpio. If they're 29, 28, or 29 degrees,
They would feel the transition. If we have Pluto in Libras, 28, 29, 30 degrees, they will feel this transition. They will be tired of relationships. And will feel that evolutionary pressure of Scorpio. Excuse my French. Shit or get off the pot. Making up their mind. Finding their own power. Okay? So this Pluto in Libra generation that's facing this first quarter square from Pluto in Capricorn, again, this is all of all the stuff that it says in the Capricorn handout. These souls are going to be feeling this generationally. They're going to be wondering what's wrong with the career. There's going to be the involution, the inner compression that says, why isn't my life working as I've put it together? And of course, all that will be emphasized when Pluto makes the exact waxing square to that natal Pluto. All right? So, keeping up and honoring the time thing, I want to talk about having transiting Pluto in this 7th house, regardless of the generation. Can you start to extrapolate everything I've said to this point, recognizing if somebody's got Pluto transiting the 7th house as it's in Capricorn? There's all this disillusionment about their relationships. You could have the Plutonian explosions going on, and you know the triangles, as I like to call them, where there's these karmic upsets in the relationships, where this one's not working and that one's not working, and all the upsets are coming along. And what am I going to do? I've got a mortgage, I've got diapers, and I don't want to be with this person, or this person, or my partner doesn't want to be with me. This is going to be the biggest emphasis that's going on with transiting Pluto. Now, it's not going to be the only emphasis. I don't mean to just reach for the distortions. The natural expressions can be, if these people have been doing their work while Pluto was in the 6th house, Pluto could go into the 7th house, and they could have the relationship of their life walk in. Doesn't have to be the negative, okay? And keep this in mind at all times.
Okay, I have Pluto transiting my 7th house, and
She has Pluto in the 7th. You got to speak up.
Pluto transiting my 7th house
Transiting
right now.
her 7th, yes.
And one of the nice things that's happening for me is I'm learning to grow up in a relationship.
Ah, good one, good one. She is learning how to mature in relationships as she has Pluto transit her 7th house. There's the social maturation, or the maturation that comes from the Capricorn archetype. Good one. Very good one. And what do we have going on here with this first quarter square from Aries in the 10th? Initiating, taking charge of their own life versus maybe being dependent upon the partner and expecting the partner to do it. The thing that will also happen with Libra, and Mark would be very good at speaking to this, is Libra is where we outpicture, or we project it onto that other, rather than acknowledging it within ourselves, Aries polarity. And Suya,
Just quickly.
you might want to sit on this side.
With Saturn in the 4th, there'll be that emotional maturity.
With Saturn in the 4th, here comes the emotional maturation process, or the shocks between these two planets up here on the 4th, 10th axes that will create that maturation process coming along. Nice one. Anybody else? This is the Libra archetype. I'm going to be quiet, and you're going to give me the ideas. Terry again.
Sorry. But in my chart, Uranus is in the 11th, just barely in the 11th, and Saturn is barely into the 5th.
She would complicate it. She would take it to the next step. I was waiting for when somebody would bring up, well, the houses don't match up. This just, the Uranus archetype in the 11th is really going to accentuate the need to be able to detach and objectify all of the relationship stuff that's going on in your life, while the emotional chaos is all upsetted right here. Because what's happening right down here is Saturn, and I'm assuming Saturn in the 4th, but, well, let me talk Saturn in the 4th, okay? That's the thing that I was going to say. If I move into the variations of this T-square in the other houses, we will be here for 3 months. So you have to extrapolate as I go around. But the Saturn is in Libra, you know, down here in the 4th. One of the other things, and I'm not going to address you directly because I'm sparking my own brain, one of the things that's also going to happen when you see the T-square in these archetypes is that we start to have all the gender issues going on. So for instance, if we're dealing with the Pluto in Virgo or Pluto in Leo generations that have this transiting 7th house here, we could have a husband and a wife going through gender switching. The husband's the provider, he gets sick, and all of a sudden the wife has to step up to the plate, and she's never done that. And Terry's shaking her head. So you can start to see how this stuff is happening. And here's one of the things about this Pluto in Capricorn transiting this 7th house. You've got to go over here to this Cancer in the 1st house polarity and really find where you yourself are at emotionally as all of this information is coming to you from these other 3 planets. You've got you've got all these relationships in your life. You've got all this career stuff and responsibility many times. You've got the home and family environment. What about me is what's going on with this transit. Deidre?
As an example, my dad is going through this right now, and he's just recently come out to me as bisexual, and hasn't been able to talk to my mom about it. So don't watch this, Mom.
I will repeat that one.
She's not interested in astrology the same way he is. He was the one that initiated me into astrology and all of this. So he's been an engineer his whole life. He really wants to be a mystic or a yoga teacher. And now it's like, what about me? What if I want to have a love affair with a man? What if I want to, I don't want to support everyone. I don't want to support your lifestyle anymore. I don't care about stuff the way you do. I want to give up all my possessions and go teach yoga and, and not subscribe to this Catholic regime any longer where our sexuality is repressed. I want to go out and express myself. And he's having a lot of difficulty right now because they've been married for 30 years. He can't talk to her about this stuff. She doesn't want to hear it. When I told her I was bisexual, she said, no, thank you. Like, no, thank you. I don't want to know that. So how difficult is that going to be for him at this point to communicate that to her?
This is a Pluto in this. For anybody who couldn't hear.
We'll just fire the tape.
Yeah, fire the tape. This is the Pluto in Libra generation over here, saying that her dad has Pluto transiting the 7th house, and he's been able to confess to his daughter that he thinks he's bisexual, but he can't tell his wife of 30 years. There you go. There's all those gender issues that are coming along right here. Here's all the relationships shakeups. Here's the polarity point Cancer in the 1st house. Who am I emotionally? Maureen?
So, what would you say to him if you were giving him a reading with Pluto right now in Capricorn and responsibility?
Oh, that's an interesting to ask all my Sag archetypes, because one of the things that I've learned coming through my own incarnation, so this will be a personal response, okay? But I'm always a believer in absolute honesty. And it upsets the apple cart, but these are all cardinal archetypes. So first of all, I would counsel this person to really go over to that polarity point, Cancer in the 1st house, and get emotionally honest with themselves and how they feel. And if they really feel that they have got to go initiate and explore a totally different gender identity, then they need to go in that direction, because this Pluto in Capricorn is starting a whole new modality cycle. You will see in your handouts between 2008 and 2066, when Pluto initiates itself in Aries again. As Pluto goes through Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pisces, we have this whole modality cycle, cardinal, fixed, mutable, with Pluto in Capricorn, of huge identity crises going on for everybody. What is my reality? Capricorn. How am I going to break free? Aquarius. And then how will I complete myself with the other, source energy itself? Pisces. So it's a very sensitive thing. And first of all, I acknowledge this person for the first step of being able to have and be blessed to have a daughter he can bring it out to and speak to. But at some point, it has to come forth in the partnership. When you have intimacy with someone for 30 years and you have secrets, those secrets blow up in your face. We all know this. We've all been through this. And so I'm always an advocate of absolute honesty, even when it creates chaos, because that's the evolution of the soul. And we have come through 5,000 years of patriarchal conditioning. So we're going to have more of it. Alan, speak.
Does Jupiter in Pisces have a play in your
Does
father's?
Jupiter and Pisces have a play in all of this? It's a good question. I would love to, again, I need lots of time. But we've got Jupiter up here with, anytime you see this Uranus in Aries, you've got Jupiter in Aries as well. So whatever's going on for Uranus, which means all of those repeated messages that are coming into the brain all the time, Jupiter's expanding it. So I know you asked Jupiter in Pisces, but this Jupiter transit in Aries is going to come along and bust open anything that's happening with the Uranus in Aries cycle. Uranus in Aries, it's in the head, the repeated messages, the individuated unconsciousness, and what we have a tendency to do is stuff that Uranian imprint or insight messages coming, we have a tendency to want to stuff it. Jupiter in Aries will not let us stuff that stuff. It will bring it out one way or another. Because Jupiter, the archetype of Sag, and the 9th house, is the archetype of finding truth and revealing truth. Maureen, would you be willing to, can you go over there and see if you can hit fan off? And we'll quiet it down, and I think you can hear, we'll be able to hear each other. I'm trying to repeat as best as I can, which I do. So anyway, I'm going to need to move on, but are we starting to get some ideas? Marie?
Transit of Pluto in my 7th house, and Pluto is in opposition with my conjunction of Sun Uranus in Cancer. There has been a breakup in my family, like sisters, sibling fighting and stuff like that.
Yes.
And it also has been a time in my life where there has been a new contact with my husband, new relationship, you know, like new way of being in a relationship together. It has transformed our relationship of 40 years. And also,
I'll repeat.
I have like to revision all of the conditioning that I receive from my family. I rethink about all the situation that has happened. I have to change my perception of the way I saw myself and of what I went through in my childhood.
Got it. She has this archetype going on, and she happens to have the Sun Uranus conjunct in Cancer. She's had a huge upset with her sister, her family, got family crises going on. However, she has been able to rebirth her relationship with her husband of 40 years, and it's causing her to look at all of her self-identity, association, and I would guess reviewing all of this home and family environment stuff. Yeah. Leroy, would you be interested, go close this off, because Libra. It's Libra. It's the Libra archetype, and we've got or Maureen, would you go ask the front desk to shut it off, because it's Libra. We all want to talk, and we all want to hear. And the outer side of Venus, which is Libra, is also the psychology of being able to listen to the other, and that's another big thing that's going on for Pluto transiting the 7th house. Is really being able to listen to what other people are saying to you in your life on a deep soul level. So we'll get this turned off, and then we'll be able to hear. Sorry about that one. Joyce?
I'm not quite understanding why you have the transits in those houses. Is that for here in Denver? Or?
No. I am going through Pluto transiting the 12 houses. And the first day I went through Pluto transiting the 1st house, 2nd house, 3rd house, the Aries, Taurus, Gemini archetypes. Today we're going to go through Pluto transiting the 7th house, which is the Libra archetype. And I'm going to move it here, and I'm going to move it here. Dominique?
I have a question about the structure of the soul. When you talk about the soul structure of consciousness, could you define that in evolutionary astrology? What you mean by that?
When I'm saying the soul structure of consciousness, I'm meaning the evolutionary states, consensus, individuated, and spirituated. Is that is?
Because you talk about Pluto and Saturn, right?
Oh, Saturn as the structure of consciousness, the individuated consciousness. Thank you. I've not spoken enough about that. I have too much information to get out, but that's good. Saturn in evolutionary astrology is the archetype of the individuated consciousness. It's everything that we are conscious of in the space-time medium. The next planet beyond it, Uranus, is the individuated unconsciousness, everything that's below the surface. The individuated unconsciousness contains the past in all its details, including past lives, It contains everything we suppress from Saturn, everything we stuff below the surface. And it contains the blueprint to the future. So Saturn and Uranus are actually key planetary pairs because these two are always battling back and forth within the soul between what we're conscious of and what we have stuffed or what's unconscious. And Uranus will release it into the environment and Saturn will push it back down. And as we've had these Saturn-Uranus oppositions 5 times over the last 2.5 years, this is what's been going on for all of us. All of us have had all kinds of stuff coming up into our mind, into our brains, that we have had to deal with, that Saturn has had to try to make sense of. When it comes to Saturn and Uranus, the outer planet always has the last word. The slower moving planet always has the last word. And Saturn has not wanted to give up its authority to Uranus, which it will do now that we're past the last of the 5 oppositions. But back to Saturn as the structure of the individuated consciousness. And again, refer to your handouts. I kind of put some notes down in there for you as Saturn with that. I mean, just think about that. Saturn's the last planet we can see with the naked eye. Saturn contains all of those inner planets that come from Sun through Jupiter. So Saturn as the structure of the individuated consciousness filters every planet. So if you will look at your relationship of Saturn to the Sun, it will tell you how your consciousness is working with your creative self-actualization, Sun. And all planets are compared to the Sun. And then the faster moving planets are compared to the slower moving planets. So if you compare the moon to Saturn, and you all have that in your chart, oh, God. Goddess. Sorry about that one. Okay, all right, so we're all going to take charge of this tomorrow, okay? And we're all going to take charge of this one the rest of the day. We're just going to get that thing on in breaks, and we turn it off before we lecture. I feel better. So again, it'll be hard to go through these examples. I'm going to do them fast. Buy the tapes. When you relate the moon to Saturn, this is your whole gender identity situation within yourself. This is your emotional self-image moon and how that is structured into your consciousness, Saturn. You relate Mercury to your Saturn, and you all have the phasal relationship in your chart. You relate Mercury to Saturn, and it's how you are trying to label and identify everything that your consciousness is aware of. Venus to Saturn, it's how you're going about meeting all of your needs within your own consciousness, Saturn. Mars to Saturn, it's about how you are initiating and going about achieving all the desires that you are aware of inside yourself on a conscious level. So see how Saturn is the individuated structure of consciousness. Inner planets will be filtered through Saturn. Outer planets, Saturn will try to then adjust that and make sense of that. And of course, the 3 outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, always throw Saturn into chaos. Yes, thank God. Thank Goddess. Because they are slower moving planets, they are the outer planets, and Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto all represent the unconsciousness. In evolutionary astrology, Uranus is the individuated unconsciousness with the past, what we suppress, and blueprints of the future. Neptune is the collective conscious unconsciousness. Neptune is also what we would call or identify with source energy or God Goddess on the most individualized way possible. It also represents the totality of God Goddess as well. And for most of us, that operates very unconsciously, Neptune. And this is, Pisces 12. And then Pluto represents the soul on an individual and collective level. And for most of us, that soul operates on an unconscious level. And those unconscious desires of the soul are made conscious via Mars. Mars, that instinct to become. Jeffrey's planetary method of chart interpretation will give you some good insights into that as well. I go through this in a lot more detail in segment 1. One of the reasons why I was so interested in DVDs is that I could say it once and then say it 1,000,000 times. Okay, that was a very good question, Dominique. Thank you. Because so here's Pluto in Capricorn, and Capricorn related to Saturn as that structure of consciousness. And what's Pluto doing? It's throwing it all into smithereens, throwing it up, and it has to rebirth itself and figure out how it's going to exist in new ways. And so again, we look at that example on a collective level, which I'll talk about tomorrow, when Pluto went into Capricorn. Look at how it took all the economic structures and just, did we feel insecure? So Saturn, because it relates to outer security as well, when we have those Saturnian upsets that come along, it creates insecurity, and the structure of consciousness, Saturn, will want to bring it back like it was in order to feel secure again. It takes courage to go to Uranus and go through insecurity to create a new awareness of something that we will eventually be able to acknowledge as a new level of security and consciousness. That's the dual desire of the soul, to separate and to return. On a deep soul level, we all have a desire to be secure. And how do we be secure? By what came before, by the past. And so all souls on an unconscious level will have a tendency to project the past forward because it represents security. And the future, no matter how much we may desire it, represents insecurity. So on a deep soul level, many of us self-sabotage ourselves. So then we need those nice things called squares and oppositions and conjunctions to stir it up enough. So evolution takes place in 2 ways. Slow, uniform, step-by-step evolution, or cataclysmic evolution. Cataclysmic evolution has a tendency to come through what we would know as the stressful aspects. Conjunctions, squares, oppositions, and of course, when you look at the cycle of phases and aspects, the semi-squares and the sesquisquadrates, which are those cross-quarter points. Got that? I think, do we need a tape change? All right, let's take a quick little break, okay, and then we'll come back and get through Scorpio and Sag. Scorpio, Sag. So we all want to socialize. That's the reason why I put that. And the moon's still in Libra, and I put that astrodrama on these 3 archetypes. Because we'd all come together and Oh. Good. Yeah, that's why we have meal times. Yep. I better not let this go. The tape has started. All right, everyone. Isn't it interesting how these cardinal archetypes get all the energy? So here we go. We're going to shift over to Scorpio, okay? You know what we're going to have to do sometime? We're going to have to do it like the nodes in the moon, and we're going to start with Pisces and go backwards through the archetypes. Maybe that's what we should do. If I make my mind up, Mars and Libra, to do this with you, with Neptune and Pisces, we're going to go backwards. Change the whole dynamic. So, yep. But, that's kind of hard to do, though. It's kind of hard to do at random because this consciousness, the psyche of human consciousness goes. There's a reason why Taurus follows Aries. Yes. Yes. All right, so let's move on to the archetype of Scorpio. All right, and this will also then relate to Pluto and the 8th house. So anytime you are dealing with this archetype of planets in the 8th house or planets in aspect to Pluto or planets in Scorpio, you're dealing with deep core soul stuff. There's just no way through that. And so we're dealing with passive fixed water as well. Now, the archetype of Scorpio will relate to a lot of what I said right at the beginning on the first day, the soul and its dual desire nature. Scorpio is where we run into the other. Scorpio moving from Libra into Scorpio. This is where we run into the other forces of power that we consider stronger or more powerful than us. Scorpio is that archetype that relates to power and powerlessness. And so it will relate to where we perceive the other to have something we do not have, and we want to merge with that other to incorporate what they have into ourselves. So why do we fall into relationships with one person and not the other person? Because on deep unconscious levels, our soul is perceiving that other outside of us to have something that we do not have within ourselves. That is what creates that attraction. And so evolutionary astrology has always considered that Scorpio 0 degree point as you're going around the wheel as to be the marriage point where you actually consummate the relationship. So we've not talked a lot about the whole, well, yeah, we did talk about sexuality. It ended up in the Cancer archetype yesterday. But from the perspective of evolutionary astrology, Taurus is the archetype of self-sex, or what we would call the masturbation. Scorpio is the archetype of sexuality with another, the merging with another. And when you go through the, excuse me, I gotta get my voice back again. When you go through that sexual union with another, the merging on the sexual levels, and you have the orgasm, you have, what orgasm is called that mini death? Okay, I think that's Latin or some language for it. French. Oh, thank you for our French people here. So when you go through that, though, what you have when you go through that physiological release, you also have that sense of merging with another and becoming more than what you were before that. And so you see it represented so literally in the sexual act. But that also exists emotionally with that archetype of Scorpio, and that's also what happens on a soul level. When the soul, Scorpio will be that dual desire nature of the soul. So when we have that desire for something, no matter what it is, be it the lover, be it the job, be it the child, be it the whatever it is, when we have that desire for that something, we perceive that something to be what we don't have, and we want to merge with that, and it's the same archetype of feeling that we've merged with source energy. So when Scorpio represents that dual desire nature, and it represents all of those exhausting desires, and we get that new lover, or we have that baby, or we get that new piece of clothing, and we have that mini moment of the climax, you know, achieving that desire, what follows after that is that sense of dissatisfaction or boredom or what else. So we replace it with another desire and another desire and another desire until eventually we're exhausting these desires. And what starts to come along is that desire to know what does this all mean? Why is this all here? This is the Sag that comes after Scorpio, okay? But what happens as we exhaust these separating desires, eventually that desire to know, why am I here? What's the meaning of all this stuff? The deep Scorpio questions of why. It leads us to then want to have that merging with source energy. So I may not be explaining it. Okay. Close enough that you're getting it, so that you're getting how Scorpio represents this dual desire nature, separate, return. And the exhaustion of the separating desires eventually allows the returning desire to become more conscious. And that's also representing that expansion of consciousness within the soul, to the point where you've exhausted enough of these separating desires, the lovers, the kids, the material stuff, through countless lifetimes. Jeffrey used to say if we knew how many lifetimes we would have, we'd go crazy. Till we exhaust those separating desires, and again, as that desire to know Source becomes more and more conscious, eventually that's the only desire left when you become what we call the avatar. So we're all on that path. And one of the things that was really most comforting for me, being all these planets in Scorpio, a sun and moon in Scorpio, and 8th house Pluto, one of the things that was most comforting for me when I found evolutionary astrology, coming up through all this patriarchal conditioning and having some of it in this lifetime, not as strongly as probably many people, but, you know, in my early New Age days, I thought that spiritual growth meant giving up sex. And I can't tell you what relief it was when I figured out it meant exhausting the desire. And so what happens with the separating desires, the last separating desire exhausted is the sexual desire. And only approximately 2%, so 1, 2, 3% of the souls on the planet have exhausted the separating desire. So we can't artificially legislate it through religion. If we could, Catholic priests wouldn't molest choir boys, and as I like to say, monks wouldn't have cravings for sugar or cigarettes. Like media monk. Leroy's moniker, his name on a lot of our website stuff is Media Monk. That's Media Monk. So Leroy has, hold on Laura, Leroy has the rulers of the nodes square the node. South node in Gemini, 12th. North node in Sag, 6th. So the rulers, Mercury and Jupiter, are square the nodes down in the 3rd and 4th. The way he came up with Media Monk is remembering the lifetime he burned down the church.
Burned down the mission.
2 Pluto cycles ago, the 1500s, like we talked about the first day. Yeah,
Yes, he was the scribe before the printing press. So those mistranslations in the Bible, he's probably responsible.
Writing it down legibly by hand, candlelight with the quill and the feather, and then of course the big bishop or priest coming in and saying, nope, that's not it. We got a new one coming in from the cardinal. Do it again. And so after about 3 or 4 go-arounds there, I kind of left the church and burned it down on my way out.
Thank you.
Little story for the Sag archetype. Laura?
Well, along those same lines, I think you see that with a lot of yogis and
Yes.
teachers from Eastern traditions, is that they may be incredibly powerful, beautiful teachers in some level, and oftentimes promoting abstinence, and yet they're having all these love affairs
Yes.
with their devotees.
Yes. Yes, that's the way that you can naturally observe, correlate in natural law that again, this last exhausting desire to release, the sexual one, is not released yet. So that's this archetype of Scorpio in a nutshell. And so then you can see how all of the sexual stuff comes in. And because we've distorted from natural law, we have all the distortions of the sexuality that go on with that we kind of touched upon a little bit. But so Scorpio, the thing to understand about Scorpio is, again, This is where we have to recognize these forces of power that are greater than ourselves. One of the other things that evolutionary astrology teaches, and that is sometimes controversial to the New Age movement or other belief systems, is that when the Big Bang happened and the unmanifest manifested itself and brought into manifestation this law of polarity, just like we each have a dual desire nature. We have separating desires, we have returning desires. Both are there. We also have separating forces and returning forces. This is what the Bible would call good and evil. And so this is the nature of manifestation. So those energies do exist. And in evolutionary astrology, we work with this through the asteroid Pluto, through the asteroid Lucifer, in addition to Pluto, Scorpio in the 8th house. And so I can't get all into that right now. By the way, the asteroid Lucifer, I did have to look it up. Lucifer is traveling between 4 and 6 degrees Leo through this workshop. So the separating aspect of Lucifer is wanting to get overly egotistical. The returning nature of Lucifer in Leo is really having those sparks of truth and creativity come through. So when you have this dual desire nature, you know, Lucifer is known as the fallen angel and the bearer of light. So just like the asteroid Lucifer, Scorpio, Pluto in the 8th house will represent these areas where the separating forces try to undermine us and attract another separating desire and delay that reincarnation and getting off the wheel, as the Buddhists say. You know, that stuff is always there trying to pull us as well. So this is where we can sometimes use that archetype of Scorpio, Pluto in the 8th. And again, how many times when you notice those platonic obsessions, compulsions, you really have to use your willpower. You have to use the will of the soul to evolve. We're given free choice. We're given as long to do it as we need or we want to take. And so sometimes, you know, you can all think of some of these areas in your life where you act compulsively. You know, my little joke is the pint of ice cream and the potato chips. You know, where I just want one, you know, and so if you open up that pint of ice cream and you have a taste, pretty soon you've ate the whole damn pint. You know, and then if you're Pluto and Virgo, then you really beat yourself up. And so evolution is not beating yourself up after you ate it. And the Scorpio willpower, and this is Virgo too. This is Virgo too. Virgo is always making that effort again and again and again and again and again until you get it right. When it comes to Scorpio, it's putting a little effort in there and going, you know, finding the ways to and it's also healing all the emotions, because that emotions is sometimes where you get the ability to put in that effort. Okay? But it's really using the force of the will, being able to go through the will. Now, when we look at, let me sidetrack because this is popping in, where you go from the spiritual to the mental to the emotional to the condensation into physical, and is these the patriarchal distortions? We've overly developed the spiritual mental at the expense of the emotional, and the emotional trips us up. As we heal those emotions, then we can use that mind to achieve mind over matter. But we can achieve mind over matter without the emotions involved. And those emotions, and so that's where the mind and the mental body and the emotional body come together and work together to then move the physical to a new level. And that area where we really work that emotional body is Scorpio. The soul. The soul is emotionally based. And you can just observe yourself and how you're wanting to do all of your own evolutions. And to really evolve, you notice it's through those emotional ahas. And if you have that spark of the spirit that has an emotional response. So, and again, it's a subject, again, we could talk about a lot, and I had to kind of highlight it. You getting an idea of the Scorpio archetype on some of the deeper levels? And somebody has...
I just briefly want to talk, say something about Lucifer. For me, what really helped me is Scorpio Pluto is psychology as well. And if you come from a perspective of depth psychology, Carl Jung, James Hillman, they don't talk about Lucifer, they talk about the shadow. And we all can, we all can relate to the shadow because behind the sun there's always a shadow anyway. Because I've struggled with Jeffrey and his Lucifer stuff. And I'm not like a chicken shit type person, but the psychological perspective resonates way more with me than evil.
Good point.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Another one you'll hear more of, more from. Gladys, question? Gladys.
Were you using the term distorted archetype synonymous with separating?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes. Yes. Again, the distortions can be the separations. You can use that kind of synonymously. Terry?
Would you kind of tie in the second house just a tiny bit with
The Taurus polarity? Okay. Oh, good one. Yes, yes. Thank you very much. Following, Libra, the archetype of Scorpio, also for me, I relate it as an archetype of codependency because I have natal Pluto in Scorpio. And my early childhood was very codependent emotionally. So that archetype of Scorpio that just wants to merge, whereas Libra is light and airy and easy and hello, goodbye, Scorpio is, I will love you to death. And that's where Scorpio just gets obsessive about that codependency, and it's fixed water, and I'm not letting go. That's where I can remember some relationships that ended, and I'm like, gee, Kim Marie, you got to hang on to that one forever? So the polarity point, Taurus, is self-reliance. So here's what happens when Scorpio wants to merge with the other, whatever the other is, another person, the job, a body of knowledge, because we perceive it to be something we don't have within ourselves. We merge with it and we osmosis that into us and we become more than we were before that merging. And then we must stand back and go to the Taurus polarity and be in the next level of self-reliance rather than clinging to the distortions of the Scorpio archetype and remaining codependent with what we just merged with. Make sense? Another question, Michelle, from...
Okay, so on a grand scale, when we speak about the separating and returning desires, then the second house, balanced with the 8th, is where we come into our individuation.
Yes.
And allow ourselves to merge
Yes.
without losing our individuation.
Yes.
Okay.
Did you hear that? Okay. And in the same vein, can you hold your thought? In that same vein, when we're looking at the Scorpio-Taurus thing, it's finding who we are without losing any of that and then merging with the next level and having ourselves, So in other words, it's as we come back to source energy, we come back to source energy more than we were when we left. And so as we then, on a grand scale, all these individuated souls evolving, becoming more than we were when we left, coming back into source energy, can you see how any time you have the tiniest little bit of evolution within your own soul, source itself evolves? Okay.
We're talking about the Scorpio-Taurus axis, but now moving Pluto into that 8th house, you've got, the
Double
Capricorn Cancer. So there's a lot of this earth, water stuff here. So
Yes.
I'm thinking that there's going to also be some security consciousness here.
Yes.
That is going to really upset the.
Yes. Let me address what you're saying quickly, and then I'll move into this Pluto and Scorpio generation. When we have this Pluto in Capricorn, it is raising all these security issues. And your example of having Pluto in Capricorn, or Pluto in that 8th house in Capricorn, that polarity point is the 2nd house Cancer, and that's pushing all of those insecurity buttons. And we have got to find our own emotional self-reliance, Cancer, from within ourselves, 2nd house. That's going to be what that archetype is as I move along and do that. Now the Pluto and Scorpio generation, if I may talk about them. I'm always fond of saying that the Pluto and Scorpios, 1983-84 through 1995, are, Michelle, would you take care of this? Will you pull that apart for me? Yes. Thank you. The Pluto in Scorpio generation, I like to say they're either going to destroy us or save us. They are the recyclers of the zodiac. And we had some very interesting conversations last night over our evening meal. I can get it, because, thank you. Yep. You know, about, all the environmental stuff, which we haven't had much time to touch upon in this topic, which really belongs to the Sag archetype. And all my Sag stuff, I came out of the womb an optimist. And so I have a lot of faith in these Pluto and Scorpios. And I'm raising one with my sweetie pie here. And then I have a niece and 2 nephews that are very close to me. And these kids range in age from 15 to 23. So I'm watching the codependencies in these guys and trying to get that self-reliance lesson out there. But, these Pluto and Scorpios are quite intense. They embody all this stuff that we learn about Scorpio. They embody all that, and they're born knowing that. So we have that extreme of the Pluto and Scorpio generation who are seduced by what we call these separating desires and separating forces and working with all the black magic and all of that separating stuff. Those souls are out there. Okay, but we also have these Pluto and Scorpios, a lot of them that are just like really trying to come up with against their own insecurities, learn these Taurian lessons, and then come to be powerhouses on the planet. And the Scorpio is not only the natural psychological detective, Scorpio is the natural scientist. And Taurus gets in there too. It's that polarity between Scorpio and Taurus. I tell you what, I can create just about anything, and I am a beautiful bricklayer. And I can tear things apart and put them back together, and so that's that embodiment of that Pluto and Scorpio generation. And they're going to come along and do things on the planet that we can really find hope with. And so I would say to all of you guys, you really want to support this generation and help them move through these codependencies and find their Taurian self-reliance so that they can really, really go forward and create some mega metamorphoses on this planet. Did you need my attention for something? Oh, can you hear me? It's not on!
So that's what I was trying
I'm free! Yes, honey.
I work around youth and children, and this is a generation that I see parents are like helicopters around them. So I know their codependencies, I don't know who created it, did the parents or what. These parents go to college with them, they go, they go into class with them. I mean, it's just, they really don't let the child, this is a whole generation that is not being let.
Here's the distortions of that generation.
I'm really listening.
I also call that generation the entitlement generation. Because what we've done with these Pluto in Libras and these Pluto in Scorpios, the Pluto in Leos, who had the Pluto in Cancer parents who couldn't love them because of all their own emotional wounding and that couldn't see who their spark of genius were, these Pluto in Leos, and then these Pluto in Virgos, they turned around and they had these Pluto in Libras and these Pluto in Scorpios, and they're smothering them. Sometimes I think they need to just, toss them out and let them learn.
I do want to add to that, but on a deeper level, like Jeffrey would say, that the Pluto and Scorpio, if they survive.
Yes.
So I think the parents who are so connected to their children on a soul level know that they're walking the line of survival.
They're working
life and death.
death.
And so that's why there's a little bit of that overprotectiveness, you know, and it takes a parent who's so genetically connected to their child to know that line that they're walking.
Yes. Yes, yes, and that is true. And then we also have these parents, these Pluto and Leos, who did not express their own creativity, that are trying to channel it through these kids. And then the Pluto and Virgos, who are worrywarts, and then trying to control everything with these kids. So, but these Pluto and Scorpios, you try and get them to do something they don't want to do. And so this Pluto in Capricorn, what's happening for them is it's going over their natal Neptunes in Capricorn. Because many of these Pluto and Scorpios have this Neptune in Capricorn, and so it's the waxing sextile is what they have going on. So they're having a lot of disillusionment. Neptune in Capricorn, Pluto over that Neptune in Capricorn. And they're really trying to figure out, why am I here and what is the meaning of all this? And a lot of their disillusionment is going to be over materialism. Because they've come in with all these material things that have substituted for God, Neptune and Capricorn, and they think they can have all this stuff. And so they're going to have to be disillusioned with it. And the way these economic cycles are going, contraction, expansion, they can't buy everything that they think they can buy. So they're going to have to, Scorpio opposite Taurus, they're going to have to reevaluate their value systems, Taurus, as they go through this material disillusionment. What is it that I really do value?
Aspect too, when Pluto is in Capricorn, is these guys are wanting the ideal work as soon as they go out to work.
Yes.
And, I believe in that too. It's a great thing to do exactly what you love. But Saturn is about putting in the time. And I think a lot of them, that's the entitlement aspect, because they're just not used to putting in the time. They're used to having it right away. And that's partly the parents who are Pluto and Leos.
Yes, yes. That generational stuff, we can see this as we look at this transiting Pluto in the 8th for any of our, no matter what the generations are. If that transiting Pluto in Capricorn is going through the 8th house, we're coming up against the roadblocks with that material world, and recognizing we don't have the power to snap our fingers and have it happen. And so they're getting all of these Aquarian shocks because that Uranus in Aries is in its own house. And then we got Saturn down here in Libra in the 5th, and no one is noticing them. And so that's happening almost generationally for some of these, but for everybody who's having this Pluto in the 8th house. If you're not waking up, Uranus, Aries, 11th house, to the broader picture, to the needs of the whole, the needs of society, then you will be ignored. Saturn, Libra, 5th house. And that's the essence of what's going on with this T-square when we start with Pluto in the 8th. With that. Deidre.
I think it also comes from not necessarily not wanting to do the work, but having so much to offer and wanting to get it out there. Having also the idea that this world should be organized in a way that we can actualize ourselves and live the lives we want to live and not have to work endlessly for, 10, 15 years, making a little tiny bit of money, in order to be able to express ourselves on the level that we can already express ourselves.
I'll address that one tomorrow with the Capricorn archetype on a broad scale, because that's not true just for the Pluto in Scorpios or the Pluto in Libras. It's true for all of us, because Pluto in Capricorn is broad conditioning of society on the broadest scale possible. And it's a lot of economic conditioning. And my 11th house Saturn to come out tomorrow in the Capricorn archetype. I will start on time. I won't do the stuff I did this morning, and I'll spend some time to address that whole thing. But the other thing that's happening with the Pluto and Scorpio generation and the Pluto Capricorn transit in the 8th house, Capricorn, Saturn, Julie had some of it right. There has to be a paying of the dues through the space-time mechanism. What will happen with Pluto transiting through the 8th house is this is souls who maybe have had some abuse of the material world or powers in past lives that now can't do it the way they used to do it. And the Pluto and Scorpio generation has that generationally. Not all of them had the abuse of the powers in the material world, but some of it was there. And so they're going to have to pay dues somehow through the space-time mechanism. What she said was not wrong. I'll address that tomorrow in the Capricorn archetype. Now, one more question, and I'm probably going to have to move on and give some time to Sag.
I'd just like to say, it's true that they feel like they should have everything now because everywhere they look. My son has Pluto and Scorpio. Everywhere these kids look, everything is now. In fact, they're calling themselves, or they've been nicknamed, the Now Generation. If you want music, you look on iTunes. If you want to buy something, it's on the computer. Everywhere you look, it's like you can have it right now.
Yeah.
So it's coming up against the material change. And it'll be interesting to see how it manifests.
Yeah. Yes. And again, we don't have all the answers here. And who are we to tell this generation they can't find a way to snap their fingers and create it now? Go ahead.
I also would reflect on Pluto and Scorpio that these children also, this generation, the planet Earth is in peril.
Yes.
And they don't know, I think they really feel it that any time it could be 911. They're...
Yeah. That's that part of that Pluto and Scorpio generation that is what I call the recyclers. They recognize the intensity of what's happening right now, and it kind of germinates within them, it gels within them, and those are those little souls who can just bring it out. And we've got 2 of them in the back room who are being raised in probably the essence of how the Pluto and Scorpio generation should be raised. We got 2 little budding Pluto and Scorpio astrologers back there. Yay! They're feeling a little shy yet.
Just a quick question.
Yes.
So the people who have
Pluto transiting the 8th house?
Of the 8th house. So
yes.
They're having Pluto transiting through the 8th house. It could be
yes.
any generation.
Any generation.
So do you believe that this is a time for people to pay their dues for whatever? Or
not across the board. Not across the board, but when you put Scorpio and Capricorn together, yes. which is Pluto in Capricorn, yes. when you put the archetype of Pluto and Saturn together, which is happening for all of us, right. that soul nature that runs up against that force of power greater than itself, and we're all running up against it somehow, magnified by the specific house Pluto's in, then we all have to run up against that. I'm not all-powerful.
So it's a power issue.
It's a power issue with Pluto and Capricorn, okay? Consensus wants to control it on the outside. Individuating is trying to go, wait a minute, I can't control it outside anymore. I must control it. I must figure it out inside. And the spirituated is recognizing it is all inside. And when I change it inside, it's reflected outwardly in the material world. Capricorn.
And do you believe it could be a maturation of the birth and death transformative process of Pluto when it goes into the 8th house with the Capricorn?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it gets intensified here. But again, this when you put Saturn and Pluto together, okay, the soul Pluto must bring itself through a space-time mechanism. And that's what we're all having to make amends with through Pluto and Capricorn. Because Capricorn is space-time. The other thing that's happening for this 8th house transit, okay, mortality issues. Death and rebirth is the Scorpio 8th house archetype. Now, Pluto, death and rebirth in Capricorn, everybody's having to face this mortality issue, which is what I was relating to the whole health of the species thing yesterday. You know, the diet, exercise, and rest thing with Virgo. But the Pluto transit through the 8th house, the death and rebirth can be literal or figurative.
My mom died the moment Pluto was on the cusp of my 8th house.
The moment Pluto went over into her 8th house cusp, she lost her mother.
And that's Capricorn, and the polarity
Yep.
is Cancer,
Mother.
the mother,
Yep.
and the transformation was to become the elder myself because I no longer had my mother.
There we go. Yep. Julie wanted to say something? And then we're going to have to move on to Sag.
At the mic, okay. One of the things that was big for me coming from traditional astrology to evolutionary with the 8th and the 2nd, and now I'll add in the 12th, is Jeffrey talking about shifting the aura. So the trauma and abuse aspect of the trauma signature of Pluto in the 8th. And having to go to the polarity, he said, when you do the work, then the aura shifts. And when I would explain that to people that I was doing charts for or teaching, that they could all sense that. They knew that when they went in themselves, that's exactly what happened. The aura would change, and then you would attract different and new kinds of relationships into your life. The trine to Pisces, to me, is when you do the redemptive work and the forgiveness work also shifts the aura. And that's the trine. So I think that's the healing aspect of, my ears. That's the healing, for me, it's a healing aspect of the Pluto trauma in the 8th.
That's a good point.
Mm-hmm.
So that's when all the, with the transit over the 8th house, that would be the time where all betrayal issue or everything is coming out and you really
all
have
that
to address it.
scorpionic
Right?
stuff. We'd have to face the reality of it. And the polarity point, I haven't spoken, the polarity point again over here is the 2nd house Cancer, the internalization of emotional security, versus relying upon all these outer forces of power that we may or may not be able to control. All right. How many? Sag, 20 minutes. We've got to move on. So, okay. When we move to the archetype of Sagittarius, what we start to relate to is that active, mutable fire. And so Sag is that archetype where we want, it's the right brain. Versus Gemini, Mercury, 3rd, left brain. And so Sag, Jupiter, 9th is where we want to have that cosmological understanding of what's it all about. How do we put our life together? We know that it means, religion and spirituality. It's philosophy, all right? And so the archetype of Sag can exist from the consensus fundamental religions, Christianity, Muslim, Islam, whatever, all the way to what we would call in EA, Sagittarius represents the expression of natural law. and the expression of natural spiritual laws and principles, which are timeless and universal. So after Scorpio asked, why, and dug beneath the surface trying to figure things out, it eventually can arrive at what we call the truth in Sagittarius. Now the archetype, or the principle of truth in Sagittarius, it exists in multiple ways. It can exist as something that we call personal truth. This is a personal truth for me. Personal truth may not be absolute truth. And so when we've run into something that we think is personal truth, you know, the fundamentalist who says astrology is the work of the devil, they're going to run into that third house polarity that confronts and exposes the lie of the personal truth to them, to then expand them into a larger, broader truth. Sometimes we do this willingly. Sometimes we resist this. How many of us, when we have our own personal beliefs confronted, turn defensive and argue for them? We are no different, you know, in our spirituated state than some lesser evolved soul is in their consensus state. And one of the things that I always like to explain about with these different evolutionary states, and it makes sense in the archetype of Sagittarius, when we look at consensus, 7 out of 10 people finding a little circle of truth here. And then we look at individuating, expanding that circle, 2 out of 10 finding the truth here. And then we move into that spirituated state where we expand that circle even further. Do you notice how consensus exists within the circle? So the Sagittarius archetype has to learn how to understand all the multiplicity of truth. Okay? And so, you know, one of the things that we have to be careful of, even in the spirituated state, is spiritual elitism. My truth is better than your truth. We know that quite well in the fundamentalist movement, but we have to watch it in this room as well. There are many paths home. You know, there's many spokes on the wheel. There's many ways to get there. And so what will happen with Sag and Jupiter, 9th house, is it does this right brain, you know, cosmological, philosophical thing. And we have these personal truths that may not be the whole truth or the broadest expansion of truth. And why isn't cosmological truth itself expanding if Source is expanding and we're expanding? That's going to expand. But one of the things that can happen with this Sag archetype and its distortions is it can be the liar, just like Gemini. Gemini, Sag archetype, both have truth versus lies. And Sag can also start to compensate. And so, how many times do you hear the Sag tell a story? And if you hear them tell the story 3 times, the story gets bigger and larger, and the facts change. You know, and then there's Gemini, but you said it this way last time. You know, that's what can happen with Sag. You know, and so the essence of Sag is really got to find, you know, as it discovers truth, to be able to stand in that truth and walk that truth. And me, 7 archetypes in Sag or the 9th house, you think I didn't have to learn that lesson? Okay, if I can say it this way to this person, I got to say it this way to this person. You know, I got to keep my story straight. You know, and so that's where I came under this, you know, for me, with Sagittarius, it's always absolute honesty, whether it's nice or not. And it's always a quest for myself to say something that I know somebody's not going to like. But I've got to stand in my truth and say it and be okay with the Gemini upset, the Gemini response or reactions. So this is how that archetype of Sag then involves all this stuff that we call higher education, you know, all those traditional ninth house words. That's where all of that stuff starts to come in. Linda?
Part of all that would be just personal integrity.
Yes.
You know,
Personal integrity.
yeah.
I beat that. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep. Terry?
Why does Sag want to exaggerate so much?
Because it's right brain, because it understands it from a cosmological point of view. Why does Sag want to exaggerate so much? Because it understands it conceptually, not literally, as Gemini does. Gemini is where we want to apply labels to the phenomenal world. Gemini's the facts, the details, you know, whereas Sag, it sees the big picture. And when it's understanding something in a cosmological way, you know, can you just see how easy it is to just get into it? Jupiter, if a little's good, if one shot of tequila's good, why not three? You know?
And where we start.
Yes. And, okay, and so I had something else that came through with the archetype of Sag, and I thought of tequila. I got carried away. And so I got to bring back something else. I was going to say it'll come.
Is it because they just know it, they're intuiting it? So
Oh, that was it. Thank you very much. That's what I... It is. You know, Sagittarius, ninth house, Jupiter is the intuition. The right brain is the intuition, the sixth sense. And so what will happen when we're working with this archetype, and it's so intuitive, and it you know, it's so cosmological, it works in, you know, pictures and ideas and understandings, then sometimes the hard part with Jupiter Sag ninth is finding words to speak. Okay? So you notice the Gemini archetype, they can talk out of both sides of their mouth. The Jupiter archetype can sometimes not be able to find words. So the Jupiter or the Sagittarius Gemini archetype is being able to take it from ideas into words and being able to understand that words are more than words. There's ideas behind them, Gemini to Sag. Okay? And so that's where Jupiter will get involved with really being able to learn how to take it from the idea out of the mouth and speak it in such a way that it can be heard. And so that's where you can get those Sagittarian souls who are mesmerizing speakers. And they'll speak in such a way that they could be telling you a complete lie, but they just, you know, especially me, I get that Scorpio and I get that Sag going, and oh man, you know. And so you've got to be able to have the Gemini polarity to recognize the lie through the words, through that energy that's behind the words. So that you can see where this whole languaging thing. But the other thing that Sag has to do is it has to learn how to find words and language spoken in such a way that it can be heard. And not preached. Yeah, I like to say that Sagittarius needs to be the teacher, not the preacher. Now, I only got 10 minutes left. So, the Pluto and Sag generation, these are little souls who have come in with wonderful cosmological understandings for the most part. What we've been learning, they came in knowing. Now, within that Sagittarius archetype will be the consensus fundamentalism. You could find this generation growing up and you know, really being fundamentalists in the world again. But the expansion of consciousness is also bringing, you know, a certain amount of them in with broader and broader cosmological understandings. So we can see some of the evolution of these fundamentalist religions through this generation as they grow up. You know, right now they're young ones. And then we have some of these Pluto and Sagittarius coming in, you know, that are coming in just, you know, gifted souls with what they're going to share on the planet. So we have the whole spectrum within that generation. when we're looking at this transiting Pluto in Capricorn in the 9th house, no matter what Pluto generation we're dealing with, this is where the reality of their beliefs is falling apart. This is the way I've put my life together, and now it doesn't make sense for my soul anymore. What do I believe? And so these guys related to Capricorn are going to try to go back to the beliefs that they had. But Pluto, having the nature it does, will not allow those old beliefs to work anymore, and it'll keep blowing them to smithereens and destroying those beliefs however necessary. And so these guys then also have Uranus in Aries over here in the 12th house. And if they're open and willing, they can literally have wonderful sparks of insight that come from source energy. Okay? If they're not willing and open, these Uranus and Aries insights into the 12th house will just put them into even more chaos, and their world into even more chaos. Saturn over here in the 6th house in Libra is going to have that tendency to, if they're on the codependent side, they're going to believe what somebody else tells them. And what they're going to need to be doing, Saturn Libra 6th house, is listening to the messages, but then going inward and figuring it out for themselves. Laura has a question.
Well, I think because they're so young. I mean, these are at the oldest, maybe 13-year-olds, or 15. They're
young. Pluto and Sag young.
So that as the adults holding that space for them, I think is such a key piece of sort of our role with this Capricorn then and an authority and parental piece, that to hold that, because I look at my friends' children of the Pluto Libra generation, they all have these Sag babies.
Yes.
And they are amazing. That's what gives me hope as I look at this generation, and they are phenomenal.
There's always hope in future generations, no matter what it is, because
they're so dialed in. They are so tapped in spiritually, and to help
Pluto
them not go into that overwhelm with this Capricorn coming in, and to come up with your own ideas and religious philosophy at 10, to hold that space for them, I think is really a key piece for the rest of us that are the
elders. The
elders.
Pluto and Libras are open, they will be open to these Pluto and Sag ideas. If the Pluto and Libras are stuck in the distortions of their extremes, they will squash down those ideas. But let's go back to this archetype, because I'm down to 5-10 minutes, and would you believe it's 11:25 and March starts at 11:30? You guys are going to have to break fast. But other things about this archetype, no matter what the Pluto generation is transiting through the 9th house, crumbling realities and trying to make sense of them. Sparks of insight from source itself if they're willing to listen. This is where this generation, which mutable archetypes are going to be more open-minded for the most part, sparks of insight to hear those repeated messages coming through spontaneously from Uranus. And then Saturn in Libra, being able to analyze it, discuss it, Libra Virgo here with Saturn Libra 6, they'll be able to churn it around and really try and figure it out. So whatever it is that's no longer working for them last quarter square, they can let it go and be shifting enough cosmological that they can create entirely new realities for themselves. Any questions with what I've just went with this archetype? Thank you. One question.
When you got to this archetype of the 9th house, everything crumbled, and I haven't understood a word you said. I have my Sun, Uranus, and Mercury in Cancer in the 9th.
Let me do this. Let me speak with you personally. Group needs to break.
Okay.
Okay? All right. Let's come back at 11:35. Give yourselves